Take it away, G.
All right. Thank you, Alex. And thank you, everybody, for joining us. I'm so happy that we're doing this. And I hope everyone out there is safe in these crazy times. But I have to say, I am delighted doing this Ask Me Anything with everyone today. I actually love this format. So I have my stopwatch on me to make sure that we can get as many questions as possible. Alex, I'm going to just state out there my goal is about 3.5 minutes per question. So we can get through. You said we had 50 plus questions to get through. Our goal is 65 3 is about 20. All right. Number one is, how useful do you think it is for ITIL that strives to embrace DevOps? I work in a public sector IT organization where ITIL is given predominance is predominant, unfortunately. Getting up to writing the Phoenix project in 2013. Patty, the lieutenant of the protagonist, Bill Palmer, the ITIL person, and she's really like the brains of the organization. She's the person who sort of analyzes the problem. Most of the good ideas actually come from her. But so much of my training came through ITIL. My first book was Ops, How to Create World-Class Organizations using ITIL in 4 steps. So despite all that, I speak about ITIL with a appreciation, but I think there are things that have come wrong in the ITIL movement that aren't new. Certainly, predates DevOps. I think the notion that, in fact, I was speaking with a friend, kind of the classic phenomenon in ITIL is that we treat each one of the 13 process areas as independent silos, whether it's change, incident, problem, release, service management. It didn't help that the consultants came in and put out assessments and graded you on, creating a maturity model, each one of the 4, and really not really taking a systems level view. So I think that's definitely a problem, and I think you see that in a lot of the large scale agile frameworks as well. And despite it not being put everywhere, that every organization is different, not supposed to implement all of them. It's not a buffet. You're supposed to eat all the food. And this is actually specifically in the ITIL guidance, and yet I think the way it's been in practice is far from that goal. So that's I think we have to be honest about what real life implementations of ITIL are. Allianz Bank in a DevOps Enterprise talk, she said we can't do DevOps because we're not finished implementing ITIL yet. We're not done with ITIL yet, which I thought was very funny and really puts a spotlight on all the behaviors that we want to see. And I had another. Oh yeah, and so the founder of Chef, Adam Jacob, he said when about DevOps, ITIL is going to change the world. And I thought, on the one hand, my first reaction was, "Oh, mean," but on the other hand, I think he's right. It's when you're talking about massive, what will really help us win in the marketplace, it really is service design, which comes from ITIL, but it is about developer productivity and so forth. So I think there's some truth in what Adam said. So to your question. I think we have to get the ITIL people on board. There's certainly going to be an impediment or an obstacle for doing things in a different way. So it's better to have them as ally. And I am, look at all the guidance coming up from whether it's Axlos in terms of ITIL v4. You take a look at what the people at ITSM Academy are doing, and now DevOps Academy. These people come from an ITIL background, and everyone knows it's about time to market and so forth. So you'll find a lot of literature that will support your mission, quote, and from the ITIL people. All right, that's number 1. 3 minutes, 12 seconds. Number 2, in the Accelerate book, you'd find delivery lead time from code committed to actually running a mission. In the literature, this is referred to as cycle time, while lead time is defined as ID delivered to production. This has led to many confusions and discussions in our company. So why don't you use cycle time to define what you have defined as delivery lead time? It's a great question. In fact, just to show you to what extent the literature is confusing in this area, if you go back to Learning to See by Mike Arthur, that was published in was it 1999, which was actually really the first books in the lean literature the Toyota production system, they actually they have a wild definition of cycle time versus lead time, and I think one of them is even not what I would call a duration. Is when you think about cycle time, usually you're talking about time is measured by a stopwatch. One of their definitions is the timing is in the denominator. So it's actually a frequency. The unit of measure is actually one of frequency. So, we were actually looking at this when we were writing the DevOps handbook, just so that we could be very crystal clear about it. We chose a definition where cycle time was the measurement of a specific operation. So how long would it take to paint or polish a part, or how long would it actually take to execute a test? Whereas lead time is the measurement as viewed by the customer. In other words, if I'm the downstream step, how long does it take you to get around to actually polishing the part that I need? That is the definition that we used, and there's actually even a more modern, contemporary other definition comes from Mick Kirsten, who wrote the Project to Product book, and he used the word flow time. But essentially, it really does come down to lead time, which is how things are measured or viewed from the perception of the customer, and cycle time, which is really about the execution of the work. So hopefully that clarifies it. And boy, it sure does seem like that's worth a blog post, just so I can get that put out there so that people can see it. So great question. And by the way, don't feel bad for the people who spent time discussing this. This is something that we spend a lot of time discussing internally, just so that we could, for the Dev Handbook, and have at least consistent set of definition to use in work. 2 minutes, 6 seconds. Number 3, the interest in digital is same as using technology for decision making. You've touched on the Phoenix project. Can you comment on the current trend? So what do you call it? Digital disruption, digital transformation, the age of software. I think to me it's all the same thing. And the frame I have towards these terms are, hey, we use whatever terms other people are using, right? If digital disruption and digital transformation are on every board agenda these days and are being discussed at levels of the company, the term we will use, right? So, in fact, the Unicorn Project, the subtitle is the Unicorn Project, a novel about developers, digital disruption, and the age of data. So we definitely latched onto that term just to describe. You always want to be, when people are asking questions about how to do something, it's really helpful to have a solution for it. I am not at all jaded or cynical about it, and I think it's all representing the fact that increasingly, every organization are dealing with new operating models, business models where they're going direct to the consumer, right? You take a look at the interesting story. I think it was from the CEO of AMC, the AMC movie theater chain, about the this letter to the CEO of Universal Pictures, talking about how Trolls World Tour movie grossed more than the first movie, even though it was direct customer, direct delivered digitally. I mean, that's just that's an industry changing event, and it's happening in almost every domain. So everyone's trying to figure out how to have a direct relationship with the customer, how to potentially disintermediate people in the middle. And so, I think that is inherently a software effort, and that inherently involves data. So I think if we position ourselves right, we are the people with the answers for people asking these very questions. There's one more thing I wanted to mention on this. Oh yeah, right. So if you look at the work of Dr. Mick Kirsten, he was the one that raised the age of software, and there's just no doubt that the next 50 years of economic prosperity will be one that is by software. And as the CEO of the famously resurgent mainframe vendor CompuWare said, he said, it is almost impossible these days to do any active investment that doesn't involve some element of software. So, all of those indicate that there's something real here, and we shouldn't ignore it or ridicule it. This is important to people who matter, in terms of the top level of leadership in almost every large complex organization. Okay, such great questions. 4. I've got a coworker that's looking for some good DevOps success stories from medium-sized businesses, say around 40 to 500 employees. This is I've found quite hard to search for, as so much of the press out there is driven by marketing and PR firms or high level. Do you have some good examples? Medium-sized businesses that have embraced DevOps culture and implemented DevOps aligned processes. Yes. Well, yeah, I'll make a confession right now. That's question actually came from my friend in Australia, Sam McLeod, I think. So, yeah, in the enterprise side, we've actually just deliberately on not small to medium-sized organizations, just because we were focused on, the organizations that have, hundreds or thousands of developers, typically billions of dollars of revenue. So we specifically, in fact, in every CFP call for papers, or so call presentations that we've done in the last 6 years, there's a bunch of them come from startups, whether it's 10, 50 people or 500 people, that we actually decline, and hopefully they'll get a note that says, the reason why we didn't choose to accept your presentation was that the organization is so small. But I think, and what the market really needs are more success stories from large, complex organizations. So, and I also felt that there's actually quite a bit of literature about this, just because so many of them tend to be software companies and startups. If you're under 500, under 250 organizations, I mean, I would still consider that early stages of a company, or early to middle stages of a company. And there's so much literature on that. One presentation we did was from Find My Past. Which was just an amazing presentation. It was about dev productivity for, they do like genealogy reports for people. And this is a massive data operation presented at DevOps Enterprise. There's been 5 or so. I'll find for you, and I'll send them to Alex, and we'll get you a more specific list. But I do think there's a lot of blog posts, just because so much marketing these days are, sort of like demand generation. They're driven by content. And so organizations are very quick to publish success story about how they do engineering in small organizations, because it is a great way to attract talent, to create and reinforce an engineering culture. So I actually read up a bunch of them about how organizations, in that stage of the company, are using DevOps principles and practices and succeeding. So you asked me for some sources, and would I consider them reliable in the terms of there being written independent party? maybe, maybe they are certainly self-reported, so maybe they're not as reliable as what you might get from an analyst firm or a consultant or an industry group. But um, on the other hand, if you're trying to use it to recruit talent, hopefully they're being honest about what they're actually doing. I hope that helps. Okay, 3 minutes, 30 seconds. 5. Does quick implementation of TC, that's theory of constraints, Lean, Six Sigma, usually take a mentor like a Jonah or an Eric? Oh, gosh, that's interesting. I would say more than a mentor or a consultant is really the notion of executive support, right? I mean, in fact, I was talking to Mike Rother, and he was the author of the aforementioned book, Learning to See, and also the author of the great book, Toyota. He was commiserating. We're both commiserating that in so much of our work, we've seen that disciplines like Lean, or these kind of internal consultative functions, they are just that. They are internal consulting organizations, and they're not really fully owned by the business line leader, the person who actually has line responsibility for the achievement of, the most important outcomes for material important parts of the businesses that we serve. They tend to be like off to the side, right? They're internal, whether it's centers of or whatever. And so the complaint would be that no one ever listens to them, right? They're just ignored by the people with the problems. And so I think that really does show that you really need these problems fully owned by and the solutions fully owned by the top levels of leadership. And this is not lip service. We're not looking for posters and mentions in passing. We want to say that these are our biggest problem, and that these principles and these patterns of solutions are what's most important to us. So I think, and then after that's identified, then it's really about finding the best experts, right? So that can be grown in, but in general, in life, it helps to know what you're doing. And so it's great to be in a situation where you can have the freedom to experiment and learn by yourselves. But when the stakes are really high, it certainly helps to have someone who's done it before. And I think that's typically where you look for senior leaders who have done it before, or consultants. And so I think at least explains the rationale of why we tend to people like this. But ultimately, you can consult to be accountable and responsible for the large objectives of the organization, right? That has to be owned by leadership. So, super great question. Um, I hope that answers your question. By the way, just a little check. How's my audio to people on the Zoom? Can I just get a indication? Alex, help me out here. Maybe we can use a participant's thumbs up, or should we do chat thumbs up? What's the best way to confirm that people are hearing me okay?
Yeah, either send a comment in the chat, maybe throw a hand up.
Yeah. A bit Mr. Robot.
What if we tried just audio? It's one option.
Okay. All right. That's a great point. I'm going to disable my video, and let's revisit in
Alex is
10
smooth
minutes.
as silk.
Stop video. Okay. In fact, if I can get some immediate feedback, if this is better or worse, that would be great. Okay, that was number 5. Let's go to number 6. Do you see DevSecOps progressing beyond the CI/CD pipeline to continue scanning and active prompt developers to increment insecure code? Oh, yeah, no. This is, by the way, I did get a question. It's like, boy, given your background at Tripwire, Gene, why didn't you why didn't you jump into DevSecOps? And is it because you didn't think it was important? I think was the implicit question. And by no means was that true, right? I totally believe DevSecOps is important. It's a natural continuation of how to create great software, eventually, ship features that customers love that help us win in the marketplace, that's safe and secure and reliable. Absolutely. But I just think that so many people are doing a better job than I ever could in describing what those practices are. I love the work that Josh Corman and John Willis and James Wickett, Shannon Leith. All right, they're all doing phenomenal work in defining what those grids are. And so my personal feeling is, man, that movement is in great hands, and I think I just don't have much to contribute to that. To the question of, do I think that security demands more than just integration to the CI/CD pipeline? And the answer is yeah, absolutely yes. Right. It involves training so that developers, we know what we're doing. It's about creating standard libraries that we use so that we can inherit the best known understanding of how to do things in a secure way without having to take 2 weeks of courses and learn how to actually do authentication and tell them it's right. I mean, I'm important, but that's not the way I want to be spending my time. In fact, bad things. I think the joke is, whenever a developer writes their own crypto library, we know that we're in big trouble, right? So the goal of the security group should be make those libraries available so that can just play and we'll have a higher degree of assurance they're going to be implemented correctly, so that the security objectives will actually be pulled. So For sure. It involves so much more than just static analysis and dynamic analysis and so forth. It's uh, and absolutely it's more than things that you would plug into a CI/CD pipeline. Okay, 2 minutes 23 seconds. 7. How do you see the role of software engineering fit into the world of DevOps? Gosh, that's a great question. I don't consider myself an expert in that. However, I do know this. I mean, I think one of the experiences that were tremendously impactful to me was meeting a gentleman named Munil Shah at Microsoft in 2014. And in fact, I think almost worked for him for an internship in 1995 when I was interviewing at Microsoft when it just I was still in graduate school at the time, and I would have been working on the Windows NT TCP/IP stack. Anyway, so he was at Microsoft for many years, and then he moved into the Microsoft Bing group, and he was part of a group that actually uh, led to the removal of the test engineering function at Microsoft. So at Microsoft, there was been a long history that every major project would have sort of four legs. There would be project manager, the software manager, the test manager, and the ops manager. And due to a variety of reasons, they said, you know what, we don't want testing to exist as a separate function, be viewed as engineering like everybody else. It was called the SDET, software engineering. Um, and anyway, so it was actually, if my understanding is correct, it was actually eliminated as a separate job code in the HR systems. And I thought this was so great because it does really show that, we don't want anyone to think that there's an external group who will find all your problems for you. That has to be fully owned by the development. And in the upcoming podcast, I actually interview Elizabeth Hendrickson, who's a hero of mine, and she actually describes some of her long learnings and aha moments in this, where she found that that phrase was taken directly from her. When people think that there's someone else who's going to find my problems for me, you end up with a radically worse outcomes. And so, if there's no one out there to find your problems, developers fully own that responsibility. I think that's really the goal of not just QA but also security, right? The goal of security is not to find all your problems; it's really to make sure the developer has all the tools and knowledge necessary so that they can write secure code in the face. So what does it mean if you're a QA engineer or a tester? It means that we've got to become engineers. We've got to learn development, and I think many of them are. And it reminds me of my friend Tom Limoncelli. He's at Stack Overflow. He's a former Googler. He wrote a phenomenal book, Administration. And he said, as an ops person, we face a fork in the road. Down one path, our salary goes down by half, and the only job we can find is at the Genius Bar at the Apple Store. Down the other path, our salary doubles because we have the hottest skills in the marketplace. In fact, it reminds me of the Stack Overflow survey, where some of the highest paid people are, quote, DevOps engineers, right? These are people working, they build code and work in infrastructure. I think the same thing we'll find in QA as well, right? It's great for our careers, and they're some of the most needed skills in the marketplace. Okay, 3 minutes, 40 seconds. Question 8. Is DevOps only for engineers? Should anyone in the value stream even care? That's a great question. Very similar to the previous one. I think everyone in the value stream must care. In fact, I remember meeting a lot of the folks at GitHub in 2014. And one of them was Sean Davenport, who is now the VP of Security at GitHub. So that was 6 years ago. Congratulations, Sean. Lives here in Portland with me. And he was talking about how at GitHub, even the people in the finance and accounting function were learning to code, so that you could potentially even have specific business rules inside of the GitHub, say, order entry systems or the revenue recognition systems or whatever, right? They could actually implement their changes directly into the Ruby code. So I I thought that was magnificent. In fact, I think even in the compliance function, this is happening. I just saw a tweet the other day where someone said we were writing the regulations and the controls at the same time. So I think the implication is that the security and compliance people were pairing with lawyers and the regulators, right? Just to um, make sure that policies, design objectives, and policy controls were actually being written at the same time, and probably what do you call it? They're probably being adjusted together, right? To so that theory and practice are being merged continuously. So I think these are just phenomenal examples of how DevOps is not just for engineers, it is for everyone in the value stream. It's not just for features; it's for reliability, it's for compliance, it's for security, and the the regulatory environment that we operate within. It's pretty awesome. Okay, question number 9. 2 minutes 13 seconds. Great question. Um, 9. I'm a strong believer in the value of DevOps, and I'm working in my organization to promote DevOps culture and practices. However, it's always linked to web companies, the Facebook, Amazon, Netflix, Google's, whereas I work mostly for non-web oriented software companies, and you're able to see how it ties to them. Can we do more work to help web companies embrace DevOps? For sure. In fact, those objections are exactly why we uh, started the DevOps Enterprise Summit, because the objection is, oh, DevOps is only for the Facebook, Amazon, Netflix, Google's, right? We are not one of them, so therefore it doesn't apply to us. So we specifically targeted uh, large complex organizations that have been around for decades or even centuries across every industry vertical. And I just get a lot of pride in the fact that we have gotten almost every industry vertical represented, whether it's retailing, although that's a pretty obvious one. The State of DevOps report said that retailing is probably the most significantly impacted vertical, and DevOps makes a difference there. But it's also, we've had government agencies, we've had banks, we've had um, large scale manufacturing integrator companies, we've had healthcare companies, apparel. I mean, just it's been awesome. So I would say use those experience reports. Just look at the plenary presentations from our YouTube channel, which Alex will post. You'll see a broad cross section of industry verticals. We're specifically looking for. We even had our first state regulator. It was the National Association for Insurance Companies, NAIC, I think. So we specifically kind of make sure that our goal is to get every industry vertical represented. Ideally, the most recognized brand industry vertical. And I would say the other guidance I would point you to is phenomenal work that some people in the DevOps Enterprise community did in this group that we call the Forum, the DevOps Enterprise Forum. It was written by a technical fellow from Lockheed Martin, a technical fellow from Northrop Grumman, Dean Leffingwell from Agile, so that was Robin Yeaman and Suzette Johnson. And they wrote a magnificent paper about DevOps applied to, they call it cyber industrial systems. And so they actually created a fictitious scenario of a automobile manufacturer that had a component to enable autonomous driving. And so what was so great about the paper is they described the different parts of the different life cycles at work. So some things you can change over the air, right? Potentially every day. Some things, you can only update in firmware. Some things you can only update, in the manufacturing process every couple of years. Say, the camera systems and so forth. It was just a really great example of just showing how these kind of principles can be applied to large scale systems engineering. And I just am so delighted that that paper is actually being heralded by the systems engineering community as this kind of a seminal work in that field. So just applaud and the work that they're doing, and just the type of leaders you find in the DevOps enterprise community. So anyway, I would refer you to those resources to help you in your battle internally. Great question. Question 10. I'm considering attending DevOps Enterprise London since the travel fees would be reduced. I've watched a lot of the YouTube videos of previous conferences. Oh, hooray! That's great. What benefits would I get from attending that I wouldn't be able to get from watching the YouTube videos later? Oh, great question. So the DevOps Enterprise Forum is a group that we assemble in Portland for 3 days, and we write guidance papers. And we've done this from for now 7 years. And when we had to cancel the in-person event, a lot of us were skeptical. In fact, one person, Ross Clanton from American Airlines, he was so skeptical that we could reproduce that magic virtually. And so we asked him to help be part of the organizing team. And I have to tell you that event, so this is a lot of working sessions. We had some mini lectures. We had, a lot of sort of built-in networking formats to really try to replicate the serendipitous interactions that you get that lead to so many aha moments. In fact, so many of the scenes in the Unicorn Project, so many stories that show up in the DevOps Ham, they really came from those interactions with a specific group of people, as well as at DevOps Enterprise. And so from the fact that it worked so well virtually made me so um, optimistic that we can pull this off. It was made possible by unhangouts, the notion of chat roulettes. So we're taking all these learnings and really deliberately designing the conference so that all those amazing type of interactions can be had at DevOps Enterprise Virtual, and that it can be as rewarding as previous ones. And I'm working on a blog post on this. I mean, I think kind of the talk track in my head is I owe so much to conferences. In fact, I feel like I owe the majority of the achievements of my career due to conferences. Almost all my co-authors I've met at a conference. I've learned so many of the aha moments I saw at a conference. And so, but a conference is more than just talks. Conferences are about finding the people you want to meet with the expertise that and stories you want to share with. And so and the community is more than just a conference. So I think our goal is really in earlier years at the conference has been to for example, if you look at the networking band, we actually chose to have a slot in the conference where there are no talks, right? So that you are forced to have those informal networking interactions. And so we want to make that possible in the virtual conference. It's going to be through Slack. We're going to make a whole bunch of networking formats available, like Unhangouts, the MIT Unhangout platform, Chat Roulette, Birds of Feather, and really framed with the goal of making sure that you are able to meet your fellow travelers who are working on similar problems. And in my case, right, they've often led to friendships that last, for decades, right? So for half my life. So that's awesome. We have some books and experts there that just like in previous conferences where you can ask questions to people who have the expertise for problems that you're having. So I would like to set your expectations that it will be as kick-ass of a conference as it's ever been, and it's as good as a virtual format can allow. In fact, I think in many cases, we'll be able to do things that you can't do at a physical conference because of scarcity of space, because you just simply can't get from one end of a spot to another, right? I think there are things that we can do to uniquely take advantage of things that you can only do in a virtual format. So this is my long way to say I'm very bullish about the virtual DevOps Enterprise Conference. I'm going to disconnect AirPlay because that might reduce bandwidth too. Okay. Oh, and of course, so if you're interested in attending, please tell your friends, and we even have quantity discounts available. All right. Register now. 11. That was 3 minutes, 45 seconds. Culture is a result and an input to a healthy environment. I've not seen many successful culture improvement efforts. What are the usual missing ingredients for achieving a good culture for rapid deployment environments? This is such a complicated topic, and what I've been working on lately, I've had a series of I've been having weekly calls with Steve Spear, one of my mentors, he's from MIT. He wrote the most downloaded article from the Harvard Business Review, the famous "Decoding the DNA of the Toyota Production System" that was written in 1999. And I think it comes from the same place as the question you're asking, which is like, how do you create a great culture that we know is one of the top predictors of performance, as measured by the State of DevOps report? Um, and when you look at the literature in this space, right, whether it's learning organizations, whether uh, it's high trust culture, servant leadership, transformational leadership, or whatever. There's something that I find, there's something I find unsatisfactory about it, just because it still is difficult to explain. And it even gets more so when you take a look at the literature around holacracy and so forth. I mean, I don't want to invalidate it. I think it is definitely there's something very important there. In fact, without a doubt, right? I think the next era of management will be dynamic learning organizations. This will replace the command and control Tayloristic cultures that were pioneered 100 years ago, but are now profoundly unsuitable for the upcoming age of software and data. Um, and so with Steve Spear, we're just what I'm learning is I'm trying to as parsimoniously explain organizational dynamics using just very simple constructs. And what we've come up with is the notion of structure and dynamics. And so structure is really the way you organize teams, how you create the structure of the organization, and also incorporates the architecture that people work within. And then dynamics is really everything else. It is, includes things like, how leaders model behavior that creates either psychological safety, where it's safe to tell bad news, it's safe to do experiments. We know that if something doesn't work, right, it's just a part of the learning process. Whereas in a culture of fear, right, failure has grave consequences, and we hide bad news. And so the simple construct is really, signals, right? Signals can be amplified, right? Like in the safety culture described in the Alcoa by the Honorable Paul O'Neill, the famous CEO of Alcoa. Or it's amplified when we have a culture of safety, psychological safety, and it's extinguished or certainly dampened when you have a culture of fear, right? And so, it's um, psychological safety is created when we focus on one thing, right? Whether it's zero workplace injuries, we know people can connect the work they do in their daily work, and we can connect it to the goal, right? Or do we have very parochial systems that only care about silo goals and not the grandest goals of the organization? So I think the big learning for me is that so much as leaders, right, it is so much of what we do is really around structure, right? In fact, um, uh, it has an outsized impact on the dynamics of the system. So I'm hoping to write more about this, and really to come up with a very pithy, maybe not pithy yet, but a succinct description of how to create cultures that enable organizations to win in the marketplace. And a big influence on this is the book Team of Teams by General Stanley McChrystal and his co-authors. And I will certainly have more news on that front later. Alex, I'll send a pointer to a previous Ask Me Anything that addresses this more. So let's tackle that after the call. All right, 4 minutes, 30 seconds. Great question. Culture. Really important, and I can't wait to share what I've been working on. 14, where do you see DevOps going in the next 5 years? Great question. I don't claim to have any abilities to predict the future, but I think certain things are evident to me, right? I think we're going to see more DevOps, not less. I think we're going to see a lot more success stories where. Let me frame this from my perspective. In the DevOps enterprise community, uh, part of the programming is always around how do we identify the top obstacles in the way of DevOps really being made so. And so in previous years, it was, how do we justify automated testing, or how do we get the security and compliance professionals on board, or how do we how do we overcome resistance from the ITIL people? And so over the years, right, we've incorporated that into our programming. And now the story, the ones that really resonate with me, is how do you get business leadership fully on board? And that's been an area of focus for us for going on 3 years. And I'm so delighted by the presentation that are being given, where it is the technology leader being presenting with side by side with their business counterpart. Or in the case that the one I really loved from last year was Levi Geinert from US Bank presenting with his boss, the EVP of digital experiences at US Bank. I might have that title wrong, but it just shows that our work is important. It is important to people who matter, and we are solving a problem that is being grappled with at the highest levels of the organization. And I think that is the direction we continue to go. If you look at the announced speakers for DevOps Enterprise London Virtual, one of them is Packet Eltridge from the Chief Operating Officer for Nationwide. So that's the Nationwide Society in the UK, one of the largest financial organizations in that organization, one of the centers of home mortgages. We're going to have some exciting announcements for DevOps Enterprise Vegas, whether it's physical or virtual, right? At a even more exciting stories from even more senior levels of the organization. And all of this makes me incredibly optimistic that people who are working on DevOps in large complex organizations will be given larger and larger remits and areas of responsibility, because we are solving problems that are genuinely important, not just for technology leaders, but for business leaders. So I think that's like the most important thing, right? Is does our work matter, right? If it doesn't, no amount of evangelizing or case studies will can overcome that, right? And I think what we are looking at is the exact opposite. In the age of software and data, technology will be a core competency, that it will be among the most important competencies of that will dictate whether an organization wins or loses in the marketplace, or whether it can achieve its mission. So maybe that's a little too high level, higher level than what you asked. But for me, that's more where my head is these days. In fact, and I think even trying to come up with this parsimonious definition of how we create organizations to achieve goals through structure and dynamics is really intended to make DevOps explainable to and dynamic learning organizations. How do we make that explainable to everybody in the organization? Okay, 4 minutes. 15. I think we're making good time here. How important are, actually, if I can let me just take a pause here for a second. How are we doing here so far, Alex? Can I get any feedback from, is this working for everybody?
Yeah, let's get some write-ins in the chat. Perhaps I can even throw a poll up here. Let's see.
A poll?
I don't know if I can.
Did you know I learned in a tweet today that Zoom has an API? There's like someone released a PowerShell library that actually lets you access the Zoom API through PowerShell. You can do things like remove users, add polls, etc.
Let's try this.
Yes, good to have feedback. Oh, how much time do we have left? 15 minutes?
15 minutes.
Okay, all right. Maybe I shouldn't be screwing around the polls. All right, I'm going to assume this is awesome. Tony, thank you. This is awesome. Thanks so much. I haven't heard Gene speak in a few years. Okay, good. All right, that's good enough for me. A population of sample size of 1. All right, thank you, Tony. 15, how important are AI and DevOps for the future of companies? Is one more important than the other? I think it's super important, and here's what I would want everyone to know is that this is not a either or proposition. Kind of one of the horrifying moments for me during the development of the Unicorn project, I got invited to it was a big data conference for leaders, and on one hand, it was very exhilarating to hear that all these initiatives going on, and every in prominent organizations, large, very similar demographic to the DevOps Enterprise Summit community, but and that they were being funded, and the exciting things they were working on. But what was horrifying was finding out to what extent these people weren't software people. I mean, there was one story that I like literally fainted out of shock, which was this. Here's my point. There are $50 million initiatives going on in every large complex organization these days around data, and they're not using version control. Right? These are fundamental. I remember having a discussion with one of these people, right? And I was trying to convince them that this is a software effort, right? And this person was trying to convince me that because they're in Jupyter notebooks, we don't need version control, which I disagree categorically. And so if you look at there was a presentation I asked Chris Berg to give last year. He's the CEO of a company called Data Kitchen, and he's a 30-year practitioner in the space. And the presentation is called "Why Your Fellow Data Nerds Need You," or something like that. And it was just this magnificent description of what is going on in every organization these days, just showing kind of the ecosystem, and where these projects are being funded from, and the goals they're trying to achieve, and the tools and vendors they use, and how much they need software people. There's a um, uh, and in so many ways, I think this is a problem that is almost mirrors the DevOps movement. It's probably orthogonal to it. It just takes days, weeks. I'm sorry, it takes weeks, months, or quarters for data to get to where it resides, which are in systems of records or data warehouses, and get them to where they need to go, which is in the hands of um, everyone to help make better decisions in their work. I love the statistic that he shared was somewhere between 30 to 50% of companies' employees use data or manipulate data in their daily work. So I think machine learning is huge, right? We're all it's it is not going away, but it is. I think the opportunity for the DevOps community is to recognize that this is fundamentally a software effort, and you need to deploy and use all of the software principles that we've learned in our communities for the last 2 to 3 decades. So we have a lot to offer, and what's better than DevOps is DevOps helping with machine learning and AI efforts. So I highly encourage you to find out who's working on those projects, and find out what the problems are, and use what you know to help. 3 minutes, 30 seconds. Time check, 10 minutes. I think we'll have time for 3 more questions. 16, what IT operating model shifts an organization should we consider when implementing Agile and DevOps? I think the best book on this is Team Topologies. This, I think, is an amazing book by Matthew Skelton and Manuel Pace. It is, uh, there's a, I think there's a tremendous amount of thinking that has gone into, how do you design the organization, create the structure, that creates the dynamics that we want, right? And we know that the silos, right, of dev, QA, operations, security, right, all working with parochial goals do not achieve the goals. This is very difficult, maybe even impossible, for them to behave as a functional team of teams, all working towards a common objectives. And I think there are a whole bunch of exciting new operating models that are emerging, that seem to be very conducive into helping with the achievement of those goals, like internal platform teams, internal consultation teams, right? Cross-functional product teams, having product value streams. I mean, I think those are all maybe not. I think those are all a big part of the equation. I think we're over the next decade, it will be clear, right? How we which ones will have the best chance of success. I would even throw in there like the Spotify guild model. I would think all of those are great places to look. So the specific books I would recommend are Team Topologies, Project to Product by Dr. McKirsten. I've now mentioned him 3 times today. And then also the book Team of Teams by General Stanley McChrystal. And by the way, one of the things I'm actually talking to one of the authors next week, and so I'm so excited about that. But I think all of those sort of inform, I think should give you a lot of food for thought in terms of if functional orientation is no longer achieving the goal, what are the other patterns that we can look to that will? 2 minutes, 30 seconds. 17. How has DevOps changed over the last decade? Now, that is an interesting question. So I attended my first DevOps conference. I mentioned how much I love conferences. I was able to attend the first DevOps days in Mountain View in 2011. No, it was 2010. Um, and I think what was amazing then is that I'm not sure even most of the people there would self-identify as being a part of the DevOps movement. It wasn't clear that even back then it was Puppet and Chef and the configuration management movement. PagerDuty didn't exist back then. I'm pretty sure. Whether it was Flickr or what is that famous bank? The early pioneers. In fact, Google, right, famously, wouldn't have identified themselves as doing DevOpsy like things. Uh, so I think that was kind of the early days of the movement, where it wasn't quite clear whether the movement existed and whether we were actually a part of it. That was definitely my memory of that. And now, DevOps is such a broad umbrella, and I think I'll sort of say sort of tongue in cheek that DevOps really is everything that the bad old ways aren't, right? So so that is a very broad definition, but it's also very inclusive, and it means that whether it's if you take a look at the software or consulting space, it means that everybody's in the game, and that has benefits and drawbacks, right? It's like everybody can't be the best, so but everyone wants to be associated with the best. So I think there's a more buyer beware that happens, and it's not enough to say that I'm doing DevOps. We really, when I make a claim like that, it really does become more important to say, all right, what are your outcomes? On what basis are you saying that you're doing DevOps successfully? What are your specific cultural norms, architectural practices, technical practices are you doing, right? And it just causes us to be more specific. I think maybe the other big thing that really I find exciting is that in the Stack Overflow developer survey, one of the top paying job categories was DevOps engineer. I think the second one were Clojure developers, which I think is great. I love Clojure. But it says that we shouldn't have to work very hard to convince people that DevOps is important, right? The demand is high. The skill sets are not widely distributed enough, and so there's a tremendous premium we have to pay for people um, to do DevOpsy like things, and I think that's great. And I think there was a wonderful quote from uh, oh my goodness, I can't remember his name, but he said the debate of whether you should put DevOps in your title, in your job title. It should be over by now, right? Just putting in your title could increase your salary by $10,000 to $15,000 a year, right? I think that's freaking awesome, right? So you'll never hear me really complaining about that. It's just a way to connect supply and demand. So I think it's a great thing. So that certainly was not the case 10 years ago. All right, 5 minutes. Next question. 18. When can we expect your next book? I don't really have anything to share with you at this point, but I can say that I am having a great time right now. 'Cause I'm very much in a learning mode. Really, really having the luxury to ask very simple questions to really smart people. And there's a wonderful freedom to be able to ask stupid questions, and like one of them was the MIT beer game. Um, uh, Being able to ask Steven Spear, right, is like, why is it that, in the famous MIT peer game, um, you have, one person playing the retailer, the next one playing the wholesaler, the one person playing the distributor, and one playing the factory, right? Why? And famously, right, in the MIT beer game, Fortune CEO companies perform no better than, I'm sorry, CEOs of Fortune 50 companies outperform no better than high school students in like 99% of the trials. Everybody goes out of business, right, because of the slow feedback loops. And I was able to ask Steve Spears, like, why is it the case that no one can look to the sides, to left and right, and say something's going terribly wrong in the structure and the dynamics of the system? Why doesn't someone sort of elevate themselves to the role of, the system level view, right? Uh, and it's just, I just spent 30 minutes this morning, kind of just understanding that. So I think it's um, just this incredible gift, right, to be able to learn this. And my feeling is that this is something that is important to uh, leaders, not just technology leaders, but every organizational leader. So I'm hoping that will eventually turn into a book, but it is at this point too early to say whether it is actually good enough to be a book, whether it actually warrants becoming a book. But the fact that I am getting so much enjoyment learning it, says to me that maybe there's a book in there. Um, Last question, 2 minutes. What new projects are you working on now? I saw something about a podcast. Right, right. So, why a podcast? It is, I'm having so much fun learning from the people I admire the most and who have influenced my career the most, that we decided to start recording them. And I suspect that you'll find them as dazzling and enjoyable and stimulating, in some case startling, as I have. And so, yeah, that's resulting in a podcast. And I think we did announce that the first one is with Dr. McKirsten and Peter Moore. So Peter Moore is comes from not a technology background, but a business background. He used to work for the CEO of the New York Stock Exchange and would work with CEOs of listed companies. And it is just this phenomenal perspective that he brings. And he's also the brother of Dr. Geoffrey Moore, the author of Crossing the Chasm and the even more amazing book Zone to Win. And so I hope that you will learn as much from that as I have. In fact, it was actually those conversations that really led to the decision to actually create a podcast around this. One other thing, they're long. They're like 90 minutes long. So I would sort of say this isn't for everybody. I would say this is only for the dedicated nerds who actually enjoy hearing experts talk and go into gruesome detail about things. So I'm hoping that the people who would be crazy enough to listen to and ask me anything from me would also be interested. And it actually launches, I think, next week. So I think the cadence right now will be releasing 1 or 2 a month. So, Alex, we are at time. Release date, I've been notified by Slack, is May 14th. So it is indeed 7 days from now.
Great. Gene, I think the audio actually got a lot better there towards the end. Why don't you try to throw on video again so I
Okay,
can see
throw on video.
our sign out.
By the way, public service announcement, Sunday is Mother's Day. And so make sure to um, uh, arm yourselves and loved ones to celebrate Mother's Day.
Great. Thank you for the reminder. Well, we hit our goal. We got through 20 questions. I know we had a lot more. We will sort of take those and assemble them and see if maybe we can throw something together afterwards. Thank you everybody for coming today and attending and for all the questions that you sent both during and ahead of time.
So
Gene,
we will
any
be
last
publishing
words?
a transcript to this, and given that if there's a sufficient backlog of questions, we'll figure out some way to get to the rest of them, one way or another. Thank you so much,
Absolutely.
everybody.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye bye.